Hey everybody, welcome back to History with Mrs. Lee. Today we are going to be talking about our third president, Thomas Jefferson. And a little memory trick that I use to remember that Thomas Jefferson is our third president is that he makes the Louisiana Purchase one of our hot dates in 1803. So 1803 matches with our third president, Thomas Jefferson. Now, let's get started with how Jefferson becomes the president. Jefferson is elected in the election of 1800, but just barely. There were three men running, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and another Democratic Republican, Aaron Burr. Remember that Thomas Jefferson belongs to the Democratic Republican Party. Well, John Adams was not very popular because of the Alien and Sedition Acts, and so it's basically between Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr. It's a very close tie, but ultimately Alexander Hamilton, one of Thomas Jefferson's greatest foes, ends up siding with Jefferson and pushes the vote in his favor. So Jefferson becomes our president in 1800. Now, super awkwardly, in that time period, whoever gets second place becomes the vice president. And Jefferson's not okay with this. So while he's president, the 12th Amendment is passed, and this 12th Amendment has become important because now the president can choose his or her vice president running mate. And that's important to us as a country because you want your president and your vice president to be on the same team, to get along, to support each other, to help make decisions for our country. All right, so next up, during Jefferson's presidency, is a very important Supreme Court case, probably one of the most important Supreme Court cases that we will study this year, and that is Marbury versus Madison. Now, the Supreme Court was not very strong during this time period. And so, at the end of John Adams' presidency, he learns that there are several openings, several positions in federal courts, and he would like to fill them with as many federal judges as he possibly can. And so one of the court positions he decides to give to William Marbury. But the problem is he does not get the paperwork to William Marbury before midnight on his last night of being president. And when Thomas Jefferson's Secretary of State, James Madison, comes into work the next day under the new president, he finds this paperwork, and because James Madison and Thomas Jefferson are Democratic Republicans, James Madison refuses to give this paper over to William Marbury. So William Marbury takes James Madison to court. The Supreme Court ultimately sides with James Madison, and this court case is important because it establishes judicial review. Judicial review is the power for the Supreme Court to ultimately decide if a law passed by the legislative branch is constitutional. And an important key player here was Supreme Court Chief Justice John Marshall. We're going to see him come up a couple more times in some future court cases that we'll look at. But John Marshall, I want you to think of him as this big, strong guy, because when you think of John Marshall, you should be thinking about him making the judicial branch strong, making the federal government strong, and helping to create this new power of judicial review for the Supreme Court. Okay. All right, next up, we have our hot date of 1803, and that is our Louisiana Purchase. Now, Thomas Jefferson was interested in the Port of New Orleans here in Louisiana Territory because it's connected to the Mississippi River. And so he thought that that would be a great thing for America to have, so that way we could travel and trade along the Mississippi River, get access to the Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic Ocean. Well, during this time period, France is fighting with Britain. And so France, little Napoleon, he needs money. He desperately needs money to fund his war. And he's kind of tired of having to take care of all this land across the ocean anyway. So he offers Thomas Jefferson all of this land, this Louisiana Territory, for $15 million. Now, that's a little bit of a problem because Thomas Jefferson, remember, is a Democratic Republican, and he believes in a strict interpretation of the Constitution. And there's nothing in the Constitution that says he has this power to purchase land for the United States. So he kind of goes back on his word, and he becomes a little bit of a hypocrite because he had chastised Alexander Hamilton for the necessary and proper clause to build the national bank, and Thomas Jefferson has to use the necessary and proper clause and say that the Constitution implies that he has the power to purchase lands for our country. So when he purchases this Louisiana Territory, it is going to double the size of the United States. Okay, so we need to remember 1803, Louisiana Purchase doubles the size of the United States. Because not many Americans had been out far that west, and he needs to know more about what's going on over there, Thomas Jefferson hires Lewis and Clark to explore the territory. He's also hoping that they're going to be able to find a water route across the continent. So Lewis and Clark were explorers of the Louisiana Territory, and on their journey with Sacagawea, they made maps of the territory, and they also kept detailed notes about plants, animals, and resources that they found out in the territory. They bring this back to Thomas Jefferson. It gets people excited to want to move west, and we're going to talk more about people moving west and manifest destiny in the next couple of weeks. Probably the biggest negative of Thomas Jefferson's presidency is when his Congress passes the Embargo Act. Now, during this time period, Thomas Jefferson has to deal with not just one country impressing his soldiers and his sailors, he also has to deal with another country. So both France and England were impressing American ships and American sailors, taking our cargo, taking our ships, taking our guys. He wanted to stop England and France from impressing U.S. sailors. So he thinks, if I place an embargo on the country, then we're going to stop trading with everybody, and that's going to end up hurting France and Britain. Well, it comes back to bite us in the butt. It turns out to be a huge disaster and hurts the United States economy. And lots of people during this time period, they create political cartoons and they display the Embargo Act as a snapping turtle, because what we thought was going to be a good law comes back to bite us in the butt. And if you ever see a turtle or the phrase, "oh, grab me," which is embargo, E-M-B-A-R-G-O, backwards, then you know that they're talking about the Embargo Act and how it had a terrible negative impact on the American economy. When Thomas Jefferson leaves the presidency, that act will be repealed.